Walk into a watch boutique right now and something feels off. The glass cases are full. The prices have gone up. But look closer, and a few of these brands are quietly charging you 5 figures for something that should have stayed in the mid-range. This is the list they don't want you to see. Number 10, Daniel Wellington. There's a word for what Daniel Wellington did to the watch industry, and it isn't disruption. It's closer to a con. There, I said it. The Swedish brand launched in 2011 on a premise so thin it barely qualifies as a business model. Put a clean dial on a commodity quartz movement, sell it for $200, and flood social media with influencer wrists. It worked for a while, the way any marketing trick works before the audience catches on. This what you're buying in 2026. The movement inside most Daniel Wellington watches is a Ronda 703 or similar entry-tier quartz caliber. These run perfectly fine in a $20 watch. At $200, you are paying $180 for the strap and the logo. The case itself is thin, light, deliberately so, because the brand understands that lightness feels elegant to someone who doesn't know watches yet. That strategy made Daniel Wellington's founder, Philip Tysander, a billionaire. In 2016, 5 years after launch, the brand was reportedly doing over $200 million in annual revenue. The machinery behind this was Instagram. DW gave free watches to anyone with a following, before that strategy had a name. They invented the influencer watch playbook that every fashion brand is still running in 2026. You have to respect the hustle. You shouldn't respect the product. But someone out there does know. They know that a used Seiko 5 with an actual mechanical movement, gears, spring, no battery, retails for under $60 and will outlast any Daniel Wellington by 15 years. They know that the plating on the DW case starts failing around 18 months. They know that on Chrono 2.4 right now, the resale market for Daniel Wellington watches barely exists. Not because they're rare, because no one wants them secondhand. The watch community has a shorthand for what DW produces: lifestyle accessories, meaning something you wear because of what it says about you, not because of what it does. There's nothing wrong with that category. But at $200, the same price as a Hamilton khaki field mechanical watch that will still be running in 50 years, the lifestyle accessory case falls apart under inspection. The Hamilton is better looking, better made, better story. The Daniel Wellington wins on Instagram. The tragedy here isn't the watch. It's the people who bought one as a milestone gift, a graduation, a first job. They deserved something real. The brand gave them a marketing budget wrapped in a thin steel case. Picture the 23-year-old who asked for one for Christmas in 2022. It's in a drawer now. Battery dead. She doesn't know why she can't throw it away. That was disposable. But brand number 9 is doing something more cynical. They're hiding what's inside on purpose. Number 9, Shinola. Shinola doesn't just sell watches. It sells a story. And the story is American. The Detroit-based brand launched in 2011 with a pitch built on nostalgia, civic pride, and the idea that buying a Shinola was an act of patriotism. The marketing was brilliant. Gritty photography, factory workers, the spirit of a city rebuilding itself. For a few years, it landed beautifully. Then the FTC showed up. In 2016, the Federal Trade Commission ruled that Shinola could no longer claim its watches were made in USA. The actual finding was that the brand was required to state that its products were built in Detroit with Swiss and imported parts. What that means in practice is that Shinola assembles watches in Detroit using movements, the actual engine of the watch, sourced from Switzerland. The Argonite 6497-2, a quartz movement used in their lower-tier pieces, is an ETA Abosch. Not designed by Shinola, not manufactured in Michigan, imported. This wouldn't sting so badly if Shinola were honest about it from the start. Plenty of great brands source movements. The problem is that Made in USA was the entire emotional hook. When the FTC peeled it back, what remained was a leather goods company that had decided watches were a good margin business. For $800 in 2026, you can buy a fully in-house mechanical movement from a brand that has been making its own calibers for over a century. Shinola's $800 quartz watch is assembling, not watchmaking. There's a difference worth knowing. What's interesting is that Shinola has largely stopped fighting the watch identity in recent years. Their product line now leans heavily into bicycles, leather goods, and lifestyle accessories. That's honest. Those categories don't require the brand to pretend a quartz movement is a craft product. The watches still sell, mostly to buyers who want something American adjacent in a gift box at a corporate price point. That's a market. It's just not a watch market. The workers in Detroit are real. The craftsmanship narrative has never quite matched them. Shinola sold you a feeling, brand number 8 sells you a name, and when the name stops meaning anything, watch what happens. Number 8. Girard-Perregaux. For a certain type of collector, the Girard-Perregaux Laureato was a solution to a problem. You wanted an integrated bracelet sports watch with genuine heritage, a watch that traced its lines back to the 70s, before the Royal Oak made that design language famous. The Laureato launched in 1975. You could argue, legitimately, that it got there first. That argument doesn't move. Watches in 2026. What happened is straightforward. The Laureato became known as the watch you bought when you couldn't get a Royal Oak. Not because it's inferior. The GP caliber inside is a genuine manufacture movement, and the octagonal bezel has a quiet elegance the Royal Oak doesn't always match. But perception is currency in this market, and the Laureato's perception calcified. Second tier. The backup plan. Once that label settles in collector forums, it's almost impossible to scrub off. The timing made it worse. Laureato demand built during the period between 2020 and 2023, when AP and Patek waitlists were at their peak and gray market premiums were astronomical. Buyers who couldn't face 2-year waitlists or $60,000 gray market premiums started looking laterally, and the Laureato, with its genuine 70s pedigree and a retail price around €10,000, looked rational. Some of those buyers loved it. Others were waiting to flip into the watch they actually wanted. When AP prices corrected in 2023 and waitlists shortened, that lateral demand evaporated. The Laureato was left with a collector base that included too many people who had bought it as an alternative rather than a first choice. The secondary market tells the story plainly. Laureato references are sitting in gray market dealer cases with significant discounts off retail. Buying at full retail price in 2026 means walking out of the boutique into a market that immediately values your watch at less than you paid. The brand itself knows this, which is why Girard-Perregaux has been releasing collaborations and limited editions at an unusually high pace, trying to create excitement in segments where the standard references have gone cold. Honestly, I keep coming back to this one, because the Laureato is a genuinely good watch, a great movement, a historically significant design, and none of that matters in a market that has already decided what it is. That's the cruelest kind of failure in this industry. Not incompetence, just bad timing locked in as a permanent reputation. Girard-Perregaux is a great watch stuck in a perception trap. Brand number 7 made a different mistake. They chose the trap themselves. Number 7. Bell & Ross. The BR01 was a genuine idea. Take the cockpit instrument panel, the large format, square-faced gauges that pilots read at a glance, and put it on your wrist. When Bell & Ross launched that concept in the 90s, it landed because it was visually unlike anything else in the market. The watch looked like it had a job to do. Somewhere between then and now, Bell & Ross became a brand with one very good idea and not enough follow-through. The BR05, launched in 2019 as Bell & Ross's attempt at the integrated bracelet market, illustrates the problem cleanly. The watch is handsome. The brushed and polished case-bracelet combination is competently executed. But it launched into a market already shaped by the Royal Oak and the Nautilus, and it had no story that those watches didn't already own. We made a square version isn't a story. It's a feature. And here's where it gets uncomfortable for Bell & Ross specifically. The integrated bracelet craze that peaked around 2021 and 2022 has cooled significantly. The watches that survived the correction, the Royal Oak, the Nautilus, the Aquanaut, survived because they have 30 or 40 years of cultural history behind them. The BR05 doesn't have that. Launched at the peak of a trend, it's now sitting in display cases as that trend deflates, waiting to see if there's a permanent audience on the other side. The movement situation doesn't help. The BR05 runs on an ETA 2894, based caliber, a competent workhorse that Bell & Ross sources externally rather than developing in-house. For a watch retailing at $5,000 and up, The movement spec is the kind of thing that collectors notice on their second pass through the specification sheet. It's not a disqualifier, but it means the watch's entire justification rests on the case design and the brand identity. And the case design is competing with Royal Oak. In 2026, Bell & Ross sits in a position that's uncomfortable for any brand. Respected, but not coveted. WatchUSeek threads on the brand frequently note that early BR01 models hold their value better than current production, which is the market's way of saying the vintage idea was stronger than what followed. The current lineup sells, but it doesn't build the kind of emotional connection that drives resale premiums or wait lists, or the conversations that make a brand grow. The brand isn't collapsing, it's plateauing. And in the watch industry, a plateau is just a slow decline that hasn't announced itself yet. Bell & Ross hit a ceiling. Brand number 6 went through the floor, and they did it while charging you extra for the privilege. Number 6, TAG Heuer Formula 1. Quartz. Let's be precise here. This is not about all of TAG Heuer. The Carrera is legitimate. The Monaco has genuine motorsport history. Steve McQueen wore a reference 1133B on his wrist at the 1970 Le Mans. And that's not a marketing story. That's a photograph. The Aquariser delivers real value at its price point. There are TAG Heuer watches worth every penny, and then there are TAG Heuer watches that exist to turn a logo into a margin. The Formula 1 Quartz range is the second thing. At $1,800 for a watch powered by a standard Ronda Quartz movement, the kind of caliber you'll find inside watches at a fraction of the price. You are buying a logo and a steel case. The movement performs identically to a movement in a $90 fashion watch. It requires a battery change every 2 years. It does not appreciate. It does not depreciate gracefully either, since the secondary market for quartz tag Formula 1 references tends to settle well below retail. The honest version of the Formula 1 quartz watch costs about $300 to make. TAG's marketing budget, F1 sponsorships, celebrity associations, the boutique build-out, closes the gap to $1,800. You're financing their sponsorships every time you tap your credit card. This is the part TAG's marketing team doesn't advertise. For the same $1,800, you could buy a TAG Heuer Carrera Automatic, a watch with a genuine column wheel chronograph movement, a manufacture-era movement in the higher Carrera references, or at minimum, a far more interesting proposition than a Ronda Quartz in a steel case. The Formula 1 Quartz exists not because it's a good watch. It exists because the brand name is worth $1,800 to a certain buyer, and that buyer isn't checking the movement. Someone on a TAG Heuer forum put it well a few years ago. I bought the Formula 1 Quartz because I wanted a tag. I got a tag. I didn't get a watch. That's the distinction. There's a version of this brand worth buying. This isn't it. So that was expensive for what you got. Brand number 5 is expensive for what they took away. Number 5, Panerai. Here's a number worth sitting with. June 2020. That is when Panerai quietly changed the P9010 movement. The engine inside their flagship Luminor Marina and submersible references, watches that retail for $8,000 to $11,000, and removed a feature that had been standard for years. The hacking seconds function, which stops the seconds hand when you pull the crown to set the time, was eliminated, without announcement, without acknowledgement on the website, which continued showing a video demonstrating hacking right through mid-2022, without any explanation to the customer who just spent €10,000 on what the brand describes as a military heritage diver. When a customer contacted Panerai USA after their new PAM 1313 wouldn't hack, the service center confirmed it in a single email. The movement has since been updated and no longer utilizes these features. That was it. The polished bevels were gone too. The perlage finishing on the dial side of the P9010, decoration applied even where it couldn't be seen through the bridges. Because that's what a brand serious about craft does, was replaced with micro sandblasting. Cheaper to execute. Invisible behind a sealed caseback. The word Panerai chose for this version of the caliber was evolution, a name that implies progress rather than its opposite. Collectors on Watch Pro site noted that Panerai's website still referenced the hacking function on product pages well after the change took effect, meaning buyers were reading specifications for a feature their watch didn't have. The Periscope blog, which did the first detailed technical teardown of the downgraded movement in 2022, captured what the new caliber actually looks like. Bridges without polished chamfers, no pearlage underneath where the balance bridge would reveal it, a main plate that is simply micro-sandblasted after machining to remove tool marks. They called it loveless. The word fits. And it wasn't only the P9010. Collectors confirmed that the P900 caliber, used in submersible references including the 44 Eco Titanio, which retails for around $70,000, received the same treatment. The hacking function and factory decorations were removed from that movement as well. So you have Panerai removing standard features from movements in watches that cost $70,000, while marketing those watches on military heritage and Italian Navy diving credentials. The Italian Navy's combat divers, the very people whose historical mission gave Panerai its entire identity, used hacking seconds to synchronize their watches before operations. The brand removed hacking seconds from those watches and called it an evolution. What makes this specific case so damaging is the brand it involves. Panerai built its modern identity on military heritage, the legend of watches made for Italian Navy frogmen, built to work in conditions that would destroy lesser timepieces. Hacking seconds exists specifically so soldiers can synchronize watches before an operation. Removing it from a watch marketed on that exact heritage isn't just a cost-cutting decision. It's the brand contradicting its own story in the one place it can't afford to. The P9010 is a Richemont Group movement, manufactured by Valfleurier. It uses the same architecture as in Panerai's P900, in IWC's caliber 32111, in Baume and Mercier's Baumatic. It's a solid movement, but it was downgraded, quietly, and buyers had no way of knowing unless they were watching collector forums closely enough. And the price went up. Panerai charged more for less and hoped you wouldn't check. The brand at number 4 didn't even try to hide it. They just asked you to trust the name. Number 4. IWC. Entry-level lines. The Big Pilot is one of the best watches you can buy for under $15,000. That's not an opinion. It's the near consensus of a collector community that's been stress-testing the argument for 20 years. The Big Pilot has a genuine manufacture movement, a soft iron inner cage for anti-magnetic protection, a design language that was already iconic before most current buyers were born. Buy the Big Pilot. You're not being warned away from the Big Pilot. You're being warned away from the Mark XX and the Portofino. These watches, retailing from $5,200 to $6,000 depending on configuration, are powered by the caliber 32111. IWC calls this movement IWC manufactured, and technically, that sentence is defensible. But what it means in practice is that the 32111 is made by manufacturer Horloger Valfleurier, a movement factory owned by Richemont Group, which also owns IWC. The same architecture powers Panerai's P900. A closely related version powers Baume and Mercier's Baumatic and Cartier's 1847 MC. You are not getting a Schaffhausen movement. You are getting a group share caliber dressed in IWC finishing. There's a Watch You Seek thread on this topic that has been running for years, and it captures the community's frustration precisely. It's a Richemont Group movement. Same as Panerai. Same architecture as Baume and Mercier. IWC calls it in-house because they're technically one building in the same corporate complex. That's not the same as Rolex machining components in their own factory in Geneva. The thread is right about the architecture. To be fair to IWC, the 32111 is a genuinely good caliber, 120 hours of power reserve, silicon escapement, solid accuracy, and the brand finishes it better than some of its Richemont siblings. The debate over what manufacture means in a group-owned movement factory is legitimately complicated. But the problem is the framing. IWC leans on Schaffhausen and manufacture in its marketing for every tier of the product line, and the entry-level watches benefit from that positioning without quite earning it. A buyer who thinks they're getting the technical pedigree of the Schaffhausen facility is getting something different. At $5,000, the gap between what's implied and what's delivered is too wide to ignore. For $5,000 in 2026, you can get a Tudor Black Bay with an in-house Kenissi movement that traces its development to Rolex, COSC certified, with proven secondary market stability. You can get a Grand Seiko SBGR 261 with a 9S65 movement that the brand serviced in-house for generations. You can get a vintage Omega Speedmaster Professional with arguably the most storied mechanical movement in commercial watch history. The IWC badge is prestigious, but prestige isn't a movement. IWC sold you the name and the look, but not the full story. The brand at number 3 doesn't even have the story anymore. Before we move on to the next part, let me tell you this. Most people don't realize this, but buying a watch the wrong way can cost you thousands, and you won't even notice it until it's too late. You walk into a store or browse online, and everything looks the same, but behind the scenes, there's a system. Prices aren't always fair, availability is controlled, and one bad decision can leave you overpaying for something that doesn't even hold its value. That's why I created a complete free insider guide to buying watches. Inside, you'll find the best watches to buy, the watches to avoid, and how to choose a watch that actually fits your style and budget long term. The goal is simple. I'll help you stop guessing and start buying smart. You'll find the free guide in the pinned comment and description. Now, let's move on to the next part. Number 3. Bremont. In April 2024, at Watches and Wonders in Geneva, Bremont arrived for the first time at that prestigious event and proceeded to do something that stunned its most loyal fans. It erased itself. Gone was the propeller logo, the symbol that had defined the brand since co-founders Nick and Giles English launched Bremont in 2002 after years spent engineering aviation-grade materials into watch cases. Gone was the triptych case construction, Bremont's signature three-piece engineering that made their cases genuinely different from anything else on the market. Gone were chronometer certifications on the new references. Gone, quietly, were Nick and Giles from any visible role in the brand's direction. The new CEO, Davide Serrato, introduced a fresh structure, land, sea, and air collections, and a new Compass Rose-style logo called the Wayfinder. The market responded the way markets respond when a brand deletes the thing its customers were buying. Writers at Worn & Wound captured the specific damage in their coverage. The new Terra Nova and Supermarine watches do not feature Bremont's signature triptych case construction. They're also missing things like chronometer certification. What replaced them are technically competent watches using 904L stainless steel, but without the distinctive engineering identity that had made Bremont. Collector forums were blunt. On the Christopher Ward forum, one longtime observer noted that Bremont had been a failing brand that needed help, but questioned whether erasing its aviation identity was the kind of help that would attract new buyers, rather than just alienate existing ones. Here is the observation that collector sentiment is circling. What Bremont's core buyers loved was not just the watches. They loved the brothers. They loved the idea of two British engineers obsessing over aircraft-grade hardening and case engineering because their father had nearly died in a vintage plane crash, and flying had become the family's way of honoring him. That story gave Bremont's watches a purpose no brand strategy document can manufacture. When the story left, so did the reason to pay the premium. The new Bremont watches might be fine. Fine is the exact wrong thing to be when your previous identity was distinctive. Bremont lost its story. The brand at number 2 never had one and built an empire on that. Number 2. Hublot. Hublot in 2026 is one of the most aggressively marketed watch brands on earth. It is also, by a significant margin, one of the worst performing watch brands on the secondary market. These two facts are not in conflict. They're the same fact from two different angles. The Classic Fusion. It's Hublot's entry into the market. They sell to first-time buyers who want the brand on their wrist. It uses a modified Sellita-based movement. Sellita makes excellent movements. Many respected brands use them. The problem is that a watch using a Sellita-based movement retails from $8,000 at Hublot, and that same movement architecture sits inside watches you can buy for $800. You are paying 9 times as much and getting the same engine. What you're buying is the carbon fiber, the ceramic bezel, and the 6-screw lug design that has become as synonymous with visible wealth as any piece of jewelry. One person who understood this transaction completely was Jean-Claude Biver, who served as Hublot's CEO from 2004 to 2012 and turned the brand from a struggling niche player into one of LVMH's trophy assets. Biver was not confused about what Hublot sold. He was explicit about it. The concept is simple, the idea of fusion. We fuse different materials, different cultures, different styles. Not, we build movements. Not, we develop calibers. We fuse. The marketing is the product is the marketing. Biver understood this better than almost anyone in the industry. The problem is that understanding how a trick works doesn't make it disappear. In 2026, the fusion concept has been running for 20 years. The 6-screw bezel has been on every wrist that wanted to signal wealth since the mid-2000s. The concept is still executed well, but it's no longer novel, and novelty was doing most of the heavy lifting. The secondary market has been noting this calculation for years. Chronohunter's analysis finds that most Hublot models depreciate around 40% relative to retail. The classic Fusion Chronograph Titanium Reference 541, NX 1171. LR was down 23.4% over the 12-month period, ending in late 2025, against a broader watch market that was itself already declining, was underperforming a weak market. The exceptions matter. Big Bang Unico references, which house Hublot's genuine in-house flyback chronograph movement, hold value significantly better. Ferrari and Sanglou collaborations in ultra-limited runs retain more than standard references. If you're going to own a Hublot, own a piece that justifies itself on technical grounds. The classic Fusion does not. You're paying for the brand at a premium and losing 40% the moment you need to sell. Here's the thing that nobody in Hublot's marketing materials will ever say. The brand spent the first decade of its life under Biver training buyers to associate Hublot with celebrity, with novelty, with the moment. When you associate a brand with a moment, you make it permanent currency for that moment and nothing else. The buyers who bought classic Fusions in 2015 as status signals now find those watches in gray market dealer cases at a discount, not because the watches are bad, because the moment passed. Hublot trained you to buy the moment. Number 1, they're training you to ignore the movement entirely. Number 1, fashion house watches. Gucci, Armani, MVMT, and the rest. This category isn't a brand. It's a business model, and understanding the model is worth more than any single purchase decision. Fashion house watches exist for one reason. Licensing is more profitable than watchmaking. When Gucci sells you a watch, Gucci has not made a watch. An independent manufacturer, typically in Switzerland or Asia, depending on the tier, has built a watch to Gucci specifications, which usually means put our logo on the dial and our name on the case. The movement inside is sourced from the cheapest supplier consistent with the retail price point. The watch itself is, in most cases, an assembly of commodity components dressed in brand equity. MVMT is the cleaner version of this story. The Los Angeles company launched in 2013 on Kickstarter with a direct-to-consumer model. Cut out the retailer, sell modern-looking watches for $90 to $150, make it feel like a lifestyle brand. That worked. The watches looked good on Instagram. The margins were extraordinary. In 2018, Movado Group acquired MVMT for around $100 million. A sale that tells you everything about who was getting rich in this transaction and who was not. After the acquisition, prices crept up. The watches didn't change. By 2026, MVMT references sell from $150 to $350. The movement inside is still an entry-tier quartz caliber. The case is still thin, light, and fashion-forward. The resale value is still close to zero. But here's the observation worth holding on to. The problem with fashion house watches isn't that they're cheap. A quartz movement in a clean case can be genuinely enjoyable. The problem is the gap between what the packaging promises and what the movement delivers. Gucci sells you Italian luxury. The movement inside their grip watch is a standard quartz caliber without any distinguishing horological feature. The retail price is several $100s. You are buying Italian luxury and receiving a commodity timekeeping device. The collector community has a phrase for this. You're paying for the label. not the engine. And in every other category of watch purchase, whether it's a $40 Casio F91W or a $40,000 Patek Philippe Calatrava, you are at least paying for something with a technical reason to exist at its price. The Casio is the most accurate quartz movement for the money ever made. The Calatrava houses a 324 SC movement finished to a standard that makes watchmakers at other brands envious. Fashion house watches occupy the worst possible position on that spectrum. They're priced above the honest budget tier and far below the honest luxury tier, where the movement justifies the cost. They live in the middle, charging luxury-adjacent money for commodity execution, sustained entirely by the power of a logo on a dial. The person who doesn't know watches sees a Gucci watch and reads, "Italian craftsmanship, heritage, fashion authority." They pay $400 and get a quartz movement their phone would outperform. The brand knows this. The transaction is built on the gap between what's implied and what's delivered. There are young collectors on WatchCrunch right now who are wearing fashion house watches and calling themselves watch enthusiasts. Some of them will outgrow it. The brand hopes they don't look down. The watches that survive the next decade aren't necessarily the most expensive ones or the most recognized ones. They're the ones where what's inside the case is worth more than the name on the dial. Some of the brands on this list still know how to make that. They just keep forgetting why it matters. The watch market has always had a hierarchy between people who understand movements and people who trust marketing. In 2026, the gap between those two groups is more expensive than it has ever been. A wrong purchase at the $5,000 tier doesn't just cost you the money. It costs you the conversation, the knowledge, the decade of wearing something that repays your attention. Get the engine right first. The case, the strap, the logo, all of that can follow. If you've been wearing a watch and not knowing why it doesn't quite feel like enough, start from the movement. Everything else is just packaging. Drop the watch you almost bought in the comments. Let's talk about whether it would have made this list. Also, hit like and subscribe. Thank you.